The kingdom of Zorath was once a land of peace and prosperity, ruled by a strong and just queen. It was a place where the stars seemed to shine brighter, and the citizens lived in harmony. At the heart of this kingdom was its beloved royal family, the queen, her loyal advisors, and her only daughter, Princess Niara. Niara was adored by the people, a bright and kind child full of life and curiosity. She was the future of Zorath, the heir to the throne. But one fateful night, her life and the future of the kingdom changed forever. It was a night like any other, with the moon hanging high over the Zorathian palace, casting a soft glow over the land. But inside the palace, the queen was pacing anxiously. Her daughter Niara was missing. The guards had reported nothing unusual, no signs of forced entry, but when they went to check on the princess in her chambers, she was gone. The windows were still locked and there were no signs of struggle. It was as if Niara had simply vanished into thin air. The queen's heart sank as the reality of the situation hit her. Where could she be? The queen whispered to herself. Niara had been close to her mother, always at her side during royal duties and family moments. The queen could not imagine what might have happened to her daughter. She immediately called for a search, but the kingdom's vast reaches made it almost impossible to search every corner of the land. Still, the queen wouldn't rest until Niara was found. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Every corner of Zorath was searched. Citizens who once celebrated Niara's presence in the palace began to ask questions, worry starting to spread like wildfire through the kingdom. The queen's advisors tried to assure the people that the princess would be returned soon, but as time went on, the answers seemed to slip further away. The queen became withdrawn, focused only on the search for Niara. She would stand at the window of her chambers, gazing out at the endless expanse of stars, praying that she would see her daughter's face again. The weight of her kingdom's future now rested solely on her shoulders. Without Niara, the royal family was incomplete. The queen's strength was undiminished, but she was not the same without her daughter. Niara's disappearance soon became the subject of countless rumors. Some believed she had been kidnapped by rival factions. Others whispered that she had run away to escape the pressure of royal life. The most ridiculous rumors claimed that Niara had somehow become a figure of legend, that she had disappeared into a parallel world, or had ascended to the stars herself. But none of these rumors gave the queen any comfort. Every lead turned out to be false, and still there was no sign of her daughter. In the quiet of her royal chambers, the queen would sometimes cry, her tears hidden from the world. She would speak to Niara in the silence of her heart, telling her daughter that the kingdom was waiting for her return, that everything would be ready when she came home. But those words seemed to echo in an empty room. No one could understand the pain the queen felt, the ache of losing her only child. She had ruled the kingdom with wisdom and strength, but now she felt powerless. The royal advisors began to turn to other matters, suggesting that perhaps it was time for the queen to step forward and assume full control of the empire. They urged her to move forward with governance and to focus on maintaining peace within the kingdom. But how could the queen lead without her daughter by her side? It was a question she could not answer. Months passed, and the queen found herself more and more isolated, her thoughts always on Niara. She began to wonder if her daughter was still alive, if she was out there somewhere in the vast reaches of the universe, longing to return home. She had heard no word, received no sign. The emptiness was suffocating. In her solitude, the queen would often remember the little moments she had shared with Niara, the days they had spent walking through the royal gardens, the times Niara had played her favorite games and laughed joyfully at the simplest things. The memories were bittersweet now, reminders of what had been lost. It had been so long, and yet the queen still held on to the hope that one day Niara would return. And then, just as the queen's hope began to fade, something happened. A strange artifact was discovered far away, on a distant planet that was unknown to most of the kingdom. The artifact was small but powerful, and it was unlike anything seen before. It appeared to be some sort of communication device, with symbols and markings that no one could understand. The kingdom of Zorath's best scientists and engineers tried for weeks to decipher it, but it seemed as if the device was sent from a place far beyond their reach. One day, a young human explorer named Jack, a wanderer of the stars, happened to be passing through the region. He had heard of the artifact and came to Zorath hoping to find some answers. He was a curious soul, known for his knack for discovering strange and mysterious objects. Jack was not a native of Zorath but had visited many alien worlds in his travels. His knowledge of the cosmos made him the perfect person to help crack the code. The Queen had heard of Jack's reputation and decided to meet him personally. She ordered him brought before her, and when Jack stood before the Queen in the royal hall, she saw something in him that she had not expected, a deep sense of kindness, curiosity, and a willingness to help. Jack immediately agreed to investigate the artifact further, offering his expertise without hesitation. As days passed, Jack continued to work on deciphering the device, each attempt bringing him closer to understanding its true purpose. Late one night, after many failed attempts, he finally unlocked the artifact's message. The message was not from a distant galaxy or an unknown race. It was a message from Princess Niara herself. The Queen stood still, her heart racing as Jack read the message aloud. Niara was alive. She had been taken to Earth many years ago, far beyond the reaches of the Zorathian Empire. She had grown up there and had even started a family. The message was brief, but its implications were clear. Niara had not been lost to the stars, but had been hidden on a distant world for her own safety. The Queen's emotions were a whirlwind of relief, confusion, and a hint of anger. Her daughter was alive, but she was not the little girl she had lost all those years ago. Niara had become someone else entirely, someone who had lived an entirely different life. And now she was coming back. The Queen had waited so long for this moment. She had believed, without question, that Niara would return to her. But now that she was coming home, the Queen's heart was filled with even more questions. What had happened to her daughter in those years? And who were these human children she claimed to have raised? The Zorathian kingdom, once the epitome of peace and stability, now stood on the precipice of change. And with the return of Princess Niara, a new chapter in its history was about to begin, one that would shake the very foundation of the empire itself. The message from Princess Niara had shaken the foundations of the Zorathian Empire. For years, the Queen had feared that her daughter was lost forever. But now the impossible had happened. Niara was alive and she was coming home. But there were more questions than answers. As the Queen stood in her grand palace, surrounded by the advisors and officials who had long sought to comfort her, her thoughts were elsewhere. What kind of woman had Niara become? And why had she raised two human children? It had been several days since the artifact had sent its cryptic message, and now the Queen waited anxiously for the return of her daughter. Her heart raced with every passing moment, both filled with hope and uncertainty. As much as she longed to embrace her daughter once more, there was a quiet fear that lingered within her. Niara was no longer the little girl she had lost. She was someone different, someone who had lived a life far away from the kingdom of Zorath, far from her mother's protection. The day of Niara's return finally arrived, and the Queen stood in the royal courtyard, her eyes scanning the skies for any sign of her daughter's ship. The crowds had gathered in anticipation, their eyes full of curiosity. Whispers ran through the crowd. What would the princess be like? Would she be the same, or had the years away changed her completely? As the royal guards raised the banners and the palace gates slowly opened, a small ship appeared in the distance, descending toward the landing pad. The hum of its engines filled the air and the crowd fell silent. The ship landed softly, its metallic surface gleaming under the sun. The Queen's heart beat faster as she stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the hatch of the ship, waiting for it to open. The moment the hatch slid open, the Queen's eyes widened. There stood Niara, but not as she had imagined. The woman before her was taller, more poised, and her eyes held a depth that the Queen hadn't seen before. She was no longer the innocent child who had once skipped through the halls of the palace. She was a woman who had clearly faced hardships, and yet there was an undeniable strength in her presence. And beside her stood two human children holding her hands. They were both younger than Niara, one boy and one girl. Their faces were filled with uncertainty, but they clung to her protectively. The crowd gasped, their eyes darting between the princess and the two children. Who were they? The Queen's mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. Niara stepped down from the ship, her gaze meeting her mother's. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The Queen saw her daughter's eyes, the same ones she had seen so many years ago, and for a fleeting moment it felt as though nothing had changed. But then, Niara spoke. "Mother," she said softly, her voice trembling but steady. It's been so long. The queen's heart swelled with emotion. She rushed forward, wrapping Niara in a tight embrace. For a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the strange children, not the years that had passed. It was just her and Niara, reunited after so long. The queen pulled back, her eyes filled with tears. "You're home," the queen whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I've missed you so much." Niara smiled, her lips curving into a small, bittersweet smile. "I've missed you too, mother. But there's so much I need to explain." The queen nodded, her face softening with understanding. "We have time, my daughter. But first, who are these children?" Her voice, though gentle, carried an underlying curiosity. Niara glanced down at the children, and the girl shyly stepped forward, clutching Niara's hand. "This is Emily," Niara said, nodding toward the girl. "She's my daughter." The boy, a few years older than Emily, stood a little farther back, his eyes wide with uncertainty. "And this is Samuel," Niara continued. "He's my son." The queen's eyes widened in shock. Her mind reeled. "Your children?" she asked, her voice faltering. "Yes," Niara replied softly, her gaze shifting to the children. "They were born on Earth, far from Zorath. I raised them there, and they are my family." The queen looked at the children, their innocent faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Emily looked up at the queen, her wide brown eyes filled with wonder, while Samuel stood protectively beside her. The queen could sense the bond between them, but she struggled to understand how this had all come to be. Why had Niara left the kingdom? And how had these human children become so important to her? "Why didn't you return sooner?" The queen's voice was gentle but filled with a mother's hurt. "We searched for you. I believed you were lost." Niara's expression darkened, and she took a deep breath before speaking. "I was taken, mother, by the rebels who sought to overthrow the kingdom. They wanted to use me to control the empire, but they couldn't. They left me on Earth far away where no one could find me." The queen's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "The rebels? But why Earth?" Niara nodded solemnly. "They thought it would be the safest place for me, far from the reach of anyone who would come looking. And they were right. I was safe there. I lived there, hidden among humans, and in time I became one of them." The queen's heart ached at her daughter's words. She had been living a life so far removed from the one they had planned for her. The life of a princess, of a future ruler, had been taken from Niara, and in its place she had found something else. A family, a new life. And the children? The queen's voice softened. "How did they come into your life?" Niara's eyes flickered with a mixture of love and pain. "They are my children. I raised them, protected them. And now, they are part of my past and my future." The queen's mind raced, trying to comprehend it all. "But you're not just bringing them home for the sake of your own happiness. You must have known that this would change everything for the kingdom. You knew the implications." "I didn't want to hide any longer," Niara replied, her voice firm yet filled with regret. "I couldn't keep running. And I couldn't keep the truth from you, mother. These children, they're part of me, and they're part of the future I want to build." The queen looked down at the children again. She had no idea what to think. It was one thing to have her daughter back after so many years. It was another to welcome two human children into the royal fold. But she could see the love in Niara's eyes, the determination to make things right, and the weight of the decisions that had led her to this moment. For a moment, the queen said nothing. She simply looked at Niara, the woman who had been lost to her for so long, and then at the two children who had become her new family. "You are still my daughter," the queen finally said, her voice trembling but strong, "and I will support you whatever this new path may be." Niara's eyes filled with tears, and she stepped forward, embracing her mother once more. The queen held her daughter tightly, not knowing what the future would hold, but knowing that they would face it together. The grand halls of the Zorathian palace echoed with the sounds of preparation. The return of Princess Niara had caused a stir throughout the kingdom, but it was the arrival of her two human children that had truly stunned the court. The queen, once certain of the security and order of her empire, now found herself navigating a world far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. Days passed, and though the initial shock of Niara's return began to settle, a new unease crept in. The palace was filled with whispers. The nobles, the council, and even the royal guards couldn't ignore the fact that Niara's return had changed everything. The queen, however, remained calm. She had always been a ruler of great strength and wisdom, but she couldn't shake the growing concern that something much larger was at play. Niara, now reunited with her family, seemed calm, but there was a heaviness in her heart. She knew that the truth of her disappearance and the life she had built on Earth was far more complicated than anyone in the palace could understand. The queen had been eager to embrace her, but there was an underlying tension, questions that were left unasked, and answers that were still waiting to be revealed. That evening, Niara sat alone in the royal gardens, the cool breeze brushing through her dark hair. The quiet beauty of the garden had once been a place for peaceful reflection, but tonight it felt different. Niara looked at the stars above, each one a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had lost. Earth seemed like a distant memory, but the weight of her decision to bring her children here, to Zorath, was beginning to feel heavier with every passing hour. As Niara sat, lost in her thoughts, she heard footsteps approaching. It was her mother, the queen, dressed in her regal robes, her presence as commanding as ever. The queen's expression was gentle, yet there was a question in her eyes. She had been patient, but Niara knew that her mother could no longer wait for the truth. "Niara," the queen said softly, sitting beside her daughter, "I've been thinking about everything you've shared with me, about your time on Earth, your children. But there are things I need to understand. You must know that the future of this kingdom rests on our ability to stand united. And now, with everything that has happened, I'm struggling to see how we move forward." Niara looked at her mother, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I know, Mother. I know that I've brought more than just myself back. But these children..." Her voice faltered, and she reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. "They are part of me, and they are part of the world I've come from." The queen's eyes softened as she looked at the children, who were playing nearby in the garden. They were not the royal heirs she had expected, but there was something in the way they looked at Niara, with trust, with love, that made the queen pause. Despite their differences, the bond between them was undeniable. "I can't ignore what's happened, Niara," the queen continued, her tone calm but firm. "You disappeared all those years ago, and now you've returned with children from a human world. This isn't just about family, it's about the kingdom. The people will have questions. They will want to know why the Princess of Zorath was taken away, and most importantly, they will want to know why you've come back with 2 human children." Niara's gaze grew distant, as if she was searching for the right words. "Mother, there's something you don't know. Something I've kept hidden from you, even from myself for a time." The queen leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What is it, Niara?" Niara took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "When I was taken by the rebels, they didn't just hide me away. They had a plan, one that went beyond just getting me out of the kingdom. They wanted to use me to destabilize Zorath, to weaken the empire. But they didn't expect me to survive, let alone raise a family." The queen's eyes narrowed as she listened. "You're saying that the rebels didn't just disappear you to a faraway planet? They had a deeper plan?" "Yes," Niara said, her voice barely a whisper. "And it's worse than you think. The rebels knew that my disappearance would cause unrest in the kingdom, that it would make the people question your leadership. But they didn't stop there. They knew that the key to breaking the kingdom's unity was a betrayal from within." The queen's breath caught in her throat. "Betrayal? From within the palace?" Niara nodded, her face clouded with a deep sadness. "It was someone close to you, Mother. Someone who had been by your side for years. They worked with the rebels to orchestrate my disappearance." The queen's heart raced as the implications of Niara's words hit her. Betrayal from within? Someone she trusted? The idea was too much to comprehend. She had been surrounded by loyal advisors, trusted allies who had served her faithfully, but now Niara was telling her that one of them had been a traitor all along. "No," the queen said, shaking her head in disbelief. "It can't be. Who could do such a thing?" "I'm not sure," Niara replied, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "But I suspect that whoever was behind this is still in the palace. They've been waiting for the right moment to strike. And they know that your rule is vulnerable now more than ever." The queen stood up, her eyes filled with determination. "We will find out who did this. I won't allow anyone to tear this kingdom apart. We'll root out the traitors and restore the peace that Zorath deserves." Niara stood with her mother, the weight of their shared responsibility settling on both of them. "Mother, there's more," Niara said softly. "The rebels, the ones who took me, they had plans for me beyond just using me as a pawn. They wanted me to turn against you, to betray you and the kingdom. But I refused. I never gave them what they wanted. The queen placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, her expression softening. I know you, Niara. I know that you would never betray your own people. You are my daughter, and I believe in you. Niara's eyes filled with tears, but the truth is I couldn't stay away forever. I had to come back, not just for myself, but for the future of this kingdom. These children, she gestured to Emily and Samuel, they are my family, but they are also the key to Zorath's future. I know that now. The queen turned to look at the children once again, her heart heavy with the weight of Niara's words. She had raised her daughter to be the future of Zorath, but now, her daughter had returned with a new family, one that would change everything. We will face these challenges together, the queen said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. Zorath is our home, and no matter what happens, we will protect it. You, Niara, and your children, you are not just a part of my family, you are the future of this kingdom. Niara smiled, the relief evident in her expression. Thank you, Mother. Together we'll make sure that Zorath will remain strong. As the queen and Niara stood together in the royal garden, they knew that the road ahead would be difficult. The kingdom was on the edge of a new chapter, one filled with betrayal, uncertainty, and the promise of change. But with the strength of family and the bond between them, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The days that followed Niara's revelation weighed heavily on the queen. What had once seemed like a simple reunion had now become a tangled web of secrets, hidden truths, and potential threats to the kingdom. As her daughter's words echoed in her mind, the queen knew that the peace of Zorath was on the brink of collapse. The question now was not just about who had betrayed them, it was about how they could protect the empire from those who would tear it apart. The palace was no longer the place of quiet reflection it once was. The halls felt colder, the air heavier with the weight of unspoken tension. The queen's closest advisors had gathered for a council meeting, their faces tense as they awaited the queen's command. The palace had been a place of power and stability for generations, but now it seemed vulnerable. The people outside the palace walls were starting to feel the ripples of uncertainty, and the queen feared that any sign of weakness would lead to unrest. Sitting at the head of the council table, the queen looked down at her advisors, her expression stern. We have a traitor in our midst, someone who has worked with the rebels to undermine this kingdom, but we do not know who they are. Her voice carried the weight of command, but there was a quiet fear behind her words. The room was filled with murmurs as the council members exchanged uneasy glances. They had all served the queen faithfully for years, but now doubt had begun to creep into their hearts. Who among them could have betrayed the queen? Who among them had worked with the rebels to destroy the unity of the empire? We must act quickly, the queen continued. If the traitor remains among us, they will strike when we are weakest. We cannot afford to wait any longer. One of the advisors, Lord Varen, spoke up, his voice low but steady. Your Majesty, we cannot move forward without knowing who we are dealing with. The rebels have always been a shadowy group, but we've never had proof of their presence within our walls. The queen turned her gaze toward Lord Varen, her sharp eyes cutting through the uncertainty. You are right, Lord Varen, but the truth is I've been blind. I've trusted those closest to me, and in doing so I've allowed the traitor to remain hidden. I will not make that mistake again. Niara, who had been standing quietly near the back of the room, stepped forward. Her eyes were filled with the weight of what had been said. But there was a resolve in her posture. Mother, I know how difficult this is, but we must act with caution. The traitor may be someone you trust, but they are also part of a much larger plan. The rebels did not just target you, they targeted all of us. They wanted to destroy the very fabric of our empire. The queen looked at her daughter, her face softening with the weight of Niara's words. You've seen what they are capable of, Niara. What should we do? Niara took a deep breath, her voice steady. We need to find the traitor, but we must be strategic. We cannot simply accuse people without evidence. The rebels have been planning this for years, and if we move too quickly, we risk playing right into their hands. The queen nodded slowly, her mind racing. What do you suggest? I have a plan, Niara said, but it will take time. We cannot rush into this. The traitor will have to make a mistake, and when they do, we will be ready. The queen looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. You've always been the one with the strategy, Niara. What do we need to do? Niara's plan was simple but risky. She proposed setting a trap. They would feign vulnerability. drawing out the traitor by creating a situation that would force them to reveal themselves. The Queen's advisors, however, were not convinced. They were reluctant to believe that they could trust anyone in the palace, and the idea of pretending weakness felt like a dangerous gamble. But Niara's conviction was unwavering. We cannot remain on the defensive. The traitor believes that we are unaware, that we are divided. We must make them believe that we are vulnerable, that the royal family is unprepared to defend the kingdom. The Queen considered her daughter's words carefully. There was wisdom in her plan, and the risks were high, but the stakes had never been higher. She turned to her council, her voice commanding. "This is what we will do," the Queen declared. "We will act as though we are weak, as though we have no idea who the traitor is. We will lure them into the open." The advisors exchanged worried glances, but none spoke against the Queen's decision. They had served her for years, and they trusted her judgment even in the most uncertain of times. The plan was risky, but it was the only option they had. As the council meeting came to an end, Niara and the Queen were left alone in the grand hall. The weight of their decisions hung heavy in the air, but there was a quiet strength between them. The future of Zorath rested on their shoulders, and they would do whatever it took to protect it. "We'll do this together," the Queen said, her voice soft but resolute. "Zorath will remain strong. I know we can face whatever comes next." Niara smiled, her heart swelling with pride for her mother. "Together," she echoed. "We'll make sure Zorath stays united." The weeks that followed were tense. The Queen played her role well, pretending to be unsure of who could be trusted. She allowed her advisors to assume that the traitor was still hidden within the walls of the palace, but all the while the trap was set. Niara's plan was in motion. The palace was buzzing with activity, the royal guards on high alert and the courtiers watching the Queen's every move. It was only a matter of time before the traitor would reveal themselves. And then it happened. One evening, during a royal banquet, an unexpected guest arrived. A figure dressed in dark robes entered the grand hall, their face obscured by a hood. The guards immediately went on high alert, but the Queen's voice rang out, commanding them to stand down. The figure moved toward the Queen, their steps slow and deliberate. For a moment, the room was filled with an eerie silence. The Queen's heart raced, but she held her composure. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The figure lowered their hood, revealing the face of a trusted advisor, one who had served the Queen for years. The room gasped in disbelief as the traitor stepped forward, their eyes cold and calculating. The Queen stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. "I knew it," she whispered. "You?" The traitor smiled, their expression one of arrogance. "Yes, Your Majesty. It was always meant to be this way. You were never meant to rule alone." The Queen's eyes narrowed with fury. "You've betrayed me. You've betrayed this kingdom." "Yes," the traitor said coldly, "but the rebels were never my true masters. It was always about power. And now, Zorath will fall." With those words, the trap had been sprung, and the Queen and Niara knew that the battle for the kingdom had only just begun. The royal palace of Zorath had always been a place of strength and stability, but now it felt like a battlefield. The revelation of the traitor had sent shockwaves through the kingdom. The Queen, once certain of her allies, now found herself questioning everyone around her. Her daughter Niara stood by her side, the weight of their shared responsibility heavier than ever. The traitor's confession was a blow that neither the Queen nor Niara had anticipated. Their trust in the palace had been shattered, and the once peaceful halls now seemed filled with shadows. But even in the darkest moments, they knew one thing for certain: Zorath could not fall. The empire was too important, and the people of Zorath deserved better. As the traitor was taken away to face justice, the Queen and Niara stood in the royal hall, alone for the first time in days. The calm was deceiving, for the storm of uncertainty still raged inside them. Niara, ever the strategist, knew that the battle was far from over. This was just the beginning of a much larger struggle, one that would determine the fate of the kingdom. "Mother," Niara began, her voice calm but filled with resolve, "this is only one piece of the puzzle. The rebels won't give up so easily. They've seen our weakness, and now they will strike." The Queen nodded, her face a mask of determination. "I know, but we cannot let fear control us. We must stand strong, not just for ourselves, but for the future of Zorath." Niara's gaze shifted to the two children, Emily and Samuel, who had been quietly watching from the side. They had been caught up in the whirlwind of their mother's return, and though they were far from home, they had proven to be a source of unexpected strength. They were not just innocent bystanders in this conflict. They were part of the future Niara had come to protect. These children, the Queen began, her voice softening as she looked at them. They are a symbol of what we must protect. You've chosen a path I never expected, Niara. But now we must all walk it together. Niara smiled faintly, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and sadness. I never expected any of this either, Mother. But they are my family, and they've shown me that there is hope, even in the most unexpected places. The Queen studied Niara for a long moment, her heart swelling with both pride and concern. She had seen her daughter grow into a strong and capable woman, but this new chapter of their lives was one that neither of them had prepared for. Still, she trusted her daughter. She had always trusted her. Zorath is in your hands now, Niara, the Queen said, her voice steady. You must lead us through this. I will support you no matter what. Niara met her mother's gaze, her resolve hardening. I will protect Zorath, Mother. I promise you that. But it won't be easy. The rebels will strike again, and we need to be ready. The Queen placed a hand on Niara's shoulder, a gesture of both reassurance and solidarity. We'll face it together as a family, and as long as we stand united, we will never fall. The days that followed were filled with tense preparations. The royal army was mobilized, the palace guards were on high alert, and the people of Zorath were told to prepare for what was coming. The Queen and Niara worked side by side, planning their next moves. There were still traitors to root out and enemies to confront, but they had a plan. They had hope. Niara spent many hours in the war room, surrounded by her most trusted advisors. The palace, once a place of grand celebrations, now served as a fortress. The quiet hum of activity, the careful strategies, and the endless paperwork all pointed to one undeniable truth. Zorath was at war. But even in the face of danger, Niara never wavered. Meanwhile, Emily and Samuel continued to adapt to their new surroundings. The life they had known on Earth seemed so far away, and yet they were resilient. They played in the royal gardens, keeping themselves occupied while their mother and grandmother worked. But the weight of the situation was never far from their minds. They had witnessed their mother's strength, and they knew that they too had a role to play in the future of Zorath. One evening, as the sun set over the palace, Niara stood in the courtyard, gazing out at the distant horizon. The air was still, but the tension in the air was palpable. The rebellion was coming, she could feel it. They were gathering their forces, preparing for the inevitable battle. But Niara was not afraid. She had faced hardships before, and this time she had a family by her side. She had her mother, her children, and her people, and that was all she needed. Mother, Niara said, turning to the Queen who had joined her in the courtyard, the rebellion will come, but we will stand our ground. We will not let them tear this kingdom apart. The Queen smiled, her heart swelling with pride. You've become the leader I always knew you would be, Niara. I trust you to lead us through this. The two women stood together, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the distant mountains. The kingdom of Zorath had faced many challenges before, but this was different. This was a test of strength, unity, and loyalty. As the days turned into weeks, the tension grew. The rebels were moving closer, their presence becoming more and more apparent. But Niara's preparations were paying off. The Zorathian army was ready. The royal guards were stationed strategically throughout the kingdom, and the people were determined to protect their home. The final battle came sooner than anyone had expected. The rebels launched their attack in the dead of night, hoping to catch the kingdom off guard. But Niara and the Queen were ready. They had anticipated the move, and the Zorathian army stood strong, pushing back the invaders with all the force they had. The skies above the palace were filled with the sounds of battle, the clash of weapons, and the cries of those fighting for their future. In the heart of the battle, Niara fought with the fury of a woman protecting her family and her people. She led her soldiers with unmatched courage, her eyes set on victory. The rebels, though fierce, were no match for the united front that Zorath had become. When the battle finally ended, the Zorathian army stood victorious. The rebels had been pushed back, their forces scattered and defeated. The kingdom was safe for now. Niara and the queen stood together on the balcony, looking out over the kingdom they had fought so hard to protect. The sun was rising, casting a warm golden light over the land. The battle was over, but the war was not. There would always be those who sought to tear Zorath apart. But Niara knew one thing for certain: the kingdom would endure. "We did it." "Mother," Niara said, her voice filled with quiet triumph. The queen smiled, placing a hand on Niara's shoulder. "We did it together." As the kingdom of Zorath began to heal from the wounds of war, Niara knew that the future was uncertain. But with her family by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The world was changing, but Zorath would remain strong. And with her mother, her children, and her people, Niara would lead them into a new era, one built on hope, unity, and the promise of a brighter future.